Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Dark water where I was drowned. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Return. Leela gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against the dark leather. Rain hammered the windshield in a relentless rhythm, blurring the world outside into a smear of grays and greens. She could barely see the road ahead, each jagged turn a reminder of her childhood in the small town of Willow Creek. It had been years since she'd left, but now the place loomed like a shadow over her half-remembered and half-forgotten. The thunder cracked overhead, mirroring the storm that brewed within her. As she turned onto the familiar gravel road that wound through the trees, a sense of foreboding settled in her gut. The branches clawed at the sky, skeletal fingers beckoning her back to a past she had tried to escape. The further she drove, the more the memories came flooding back, hazy images of laughter and sunlight, twisted into something darker. A sinking feeling in her chest tightened with each mile, urging her to turn around. But she couldn't. Not now. Willow Creek emerged from the haze, a ghost of its former self. The quaint houses, once vibrant with life, stood muted and abandoned, their windows like hollow eyes watching her return. The town felt as if it had exhaling years of grief and guilt. Leela's heart raced as she approached her childhood home, the once bright blue paint now faded and peeling. Memories rushed in her mother's laughter, her brother's mischievous smile, the games they played in the yard. And in the void the day it all changed. She stepped out of the car, the damp air wrapping around her like a shroud. The house stood silent, but a whisper of wind stirred the leaves, and she felt an inexplicable pull towards the lake just beyond the tree line. The same lake where her brother had drowned. Leela's breath caught in her throat, and she hesitated, the weight of her past heavy on her shoulders. The memories surged within her, a tidal wave of grief and anger. Leela, a voice echoed from the depths of her mind, soft yet insistent, as if it were carried on the wind. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the sound as the result of stress, but the calling only grew louder, a siren song urging her closer to the water's edge. With trembling steps, she made her way toward the lake, the ground squelching beneath her boots. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with tension. As she reached the bank, the water glimmered ominously under the slate sky, dark and deep, and the whispers wrapped around her like a cold embrace. Leela stood at the water's edge, heart racing, as memories surged, her brother laughing, splashing in the shallows, the moment everything changed. Leela, the voice called again, clearer now, slicing through the fog of her thoughts. She peered into the water, her reflection distorted by ripples that danced like shadows beneath the surface, and she knew she couldn't turn back. Not yet. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. Leela stood at the lake's edge, the whispers still swirling in her mind like fog. She felt the cold water lapping at her boots, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, trying to decipher the memories that clawed at her consciousness. The surface shimmered beneath the overcast sky, and for a moment, it felt as if time had folded around her, pulling her back into the past. Flashback: Lila was 10, her brother Jake beside her, both of them wading in the shallows of the very lake that now held her captive. He laughed as he splashed her, a wild child with a grin that could light up the darkest corners of her heart. "Catch me if you can," he teased, darting deeper into the water, the sunlight dancing off his brown curls. Leela chased him, her small hands reaching out, but she couldn't swim as well as he could. "Leela, look," Jake called, pointing at a frog jumping between the lily pads. The joy in his voice echoed in her mind, but then it twisted into a haunting memory of frantic screams and splashes. Present. Leela shook her head, pushing the memory away. No, not now, she whispered to herself, feeling her heart thud painfully against her ribs. The weight of her family's silence loomed heavy. Her mother had always avoided the subject, filling their home with a suffocating hush that pressed down like the storm clouds above. They had never spoken of Jake's death, as if by ignoring it, they could erase it from existence. But the memories remained, festering like an untreated wound. Drawing in a shaky breath, she stepped away from the water, but something compelled her to look back. The surface rippled again, and in that moment, she caught a glimpse of someone beneath the murky depths. A shadow shifted, elongated, and for a heartbeat, it resembled Jake, his bright eyes staring back at her, unblinking and forlorn. Leela's breath hitched, and she stumbled backward, her heart racing. Was she losing her mind? It had been years since she had thought of her brother like this, so vividly and painfully. She turned away, her mind racing with questions. The lake felt alive, a keeper of secrets that whispered her name in familiar tones, beckoning her to remember. With her heart pounding, she took a tentative step toward the water again. "Jake!" she called out, her voice trembling as it echoed against the shore. The lake rippled violently, and the shadow vanished, swallowed by darkness. Fear gripped her, but there was something else, an undeniable pull, as if the water itself was beckoning her closer, inviting her to uncover the truth of what lay beneath its surface. Leela's sanity wavered, and as the memories surged once more, she realized she had to confront not just the lake, but the buried echoes of her past. It was time to uncover the secrets that haunted her family and herself. Chapter 3: The Descent in Possession. Leela couldn't shake the feeling that the lake was calling to her, a siren song pulling her deeper into a darkness she barely understood. The shadowy figure she'd seen beneath the surface lingered in her mind, and the whispers seemed to echo in every corner of her thoughts. She had to know the truth about Jake's death, the truth that her family had buried beneath years of silence. For days, she buried herself in research, scouring the local library for any mention of the lake. The walls of the dusty building closed in on her as she combed through old newspapers and forgotten records. Articles detailed various drownings over the years, but none held the answers she sought. Each page turned deepened her obsession. Stories of a cursed lake intertwined with dark legends, and the townsfolk's hushed warnings about the water's malevolence. "Every death is an accident, Leela," an old librarian said, her voice barely a whisper as she handed Lila a brittle newspaper clipping. "You shouldn't dwell on it." But Leela couldn't let it go. As she read about the others who had vanished, children, teens, even adults, her heart raced. The lake wasn't just a place of loss, it was a predator, luring in unsuspecting souls. The more she uncovered, the more a nagging thought gripped her. Was Jake just another victim, or was there something more sinister at play? Returning home late one evening, she found her mother waiting, her expression tight and pale. "You're obsessed, Leela," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "You need to stop this." "Stop what?" Leela shot back, her voice rising. "I'm trying to understand what happened. Don't you want to know? Don't you care?" Her mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the pain of old wounds evident. "What happened to Jake was a tragedy. We can't change it, but we can move on. This obsession will only hurt you." Leela felt her heart harden. "You mean moving on like you did? Ignoring it? Acting like it never happened? I can't do that." The words tumbled out, raw and jagged. The tension hung between them, heavy with unresolved grief and unspoken fears. "You don't understand," her mother cried, voice breaking. "This lake, it holds more than just memories. It's dangerous, Leela." "Dangerous?" Or is it just the truth you're afraid of? Leela's words cut deep, and she saw the flicker of hurt in her mother's eyes. In that moment, the battle lines were drawn, her mother representing the silence that had suffocated their family, and Leela determined to uncover the darkness hidden beneath the surface. "I won't let this go," Leela declared, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I have to face it. I have to face him." As her mother turned away, Leela felt the weight of her decision press down on her. She was alone in her quest, but the pull of the lake was stronger than ever. She needed to return to confront whatever darkness awaited her beneath the water, and to unearth the truth that had haunted her for too long. Chapter 4. The Haunting. Leela stood at the edge of the lake once more, the air thick with an eerie stillness that seemed to vibrate with unspoken words. Days had passed since her heated argument with her mother, but the conflict weighed heavily on her mind. Despite the turmoil at home, she felt an irresistible pull to return. Each visit to the lake chipped away at her resolve, further entrenching her obsession. That night, Leela tossed and turned in bed, haunted by vivid dreams that twisted her reality. She found herself standing in the shallow water, the moonlight illuminating Jake's face, pale and sorrowful. "Leela," he whispered, his voice a fragile thread weaving through the darkness. She reached for him, her fingers grazing the surface, but as she did, the water swallowed him whole, dragging him down with a mournful cry. She woke with a start, heart pounding, a cold sweat clinging to her skin. Determined to find answers, she returned to the lake the next day. As she approached the water, she noticed something glinting among the reeds, a small silver toy car, Jake's favorite from their childhood. Panic surged through her. "How did you get here?" she muttered, kneeling to retrieve it. The moment her fingers touched the metal, the world shifted. A voice echoed in her mind, clearer than any memory. "Leela, help me." She whipped around, heart racing, but the woods remained silent. "This isn't real," she whispered, trying to convince herself. Was she losing her grip on reality? That night, the nightmares returned, each more intense than the last. Leela found herself trapped underwater, struggling to breathe as shadows danced around her. She could hear Jake's voice calling for her, but the words twisted into something unrecognizable, a cacophony of pain and regret. She woke again, gasping for air, but this time something felt different. She felt the weight of a presence, a pressure in the room as if someone or something was watching her. "Leela," a soft, familiar voice called from the dark corner of her bedroom, a cruel imitation of her brother. "Why won't you help me?" "Stop it," she shouted, clutching her head as if she could squeeze the thoughts out. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sank to the floor, trembling. How much longer could she endure this? With each encounter, the lines between reality and hallucination blurred. The whispers in the dark, the fleeting glimpses of her brother, they taunted her sanity, gnawing at the edges of her mind. Was she truly seeing him, or was the trauma of his death driving her to madness? She felt herself slipping, the weight of grief pulling her down like the depths of the lake. Leela knew she had to confront the truth before it consumed her. The haunting of her brother's spirit was not just a cry for help. It was a desperate plea for resolution, and she was running out of time. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Leela's hands trembled as she rifled through the dusty boxes in the attic of her childhood home. The musty scent of old paper and forgotten memories filled the air, suffocating yet familiar. She had spent days avoiding her mother, seeking solace in the labyrinth of her past, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth about Jake's death. Each encounter with the lake had intensified her obsession, urging her to dig deeper. Finally, buried beneath yellowed newspapers and tattered books, Leela stumbled upon an old leather-bound journal, its spine cracked and fragile. Her heart raced as she pried it open, the pages brittle and frayed. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, filled with notations about the lake's dark history, tales of drownings, disappearances, and whispered rumors of sinister rituals performed under the cover of night. Leela's breath caught as she read snippets about the keeper of the lake, a figure that loomed large in local lore, said to demand sacrifices in exchange for safety from its depths. The accounts detailed strange gatherings near the water, suggesting that Jake's death was not an accident, but part of a darker, more twisted narrative. Foul play lurked in the shadows, masked by grief and fear. "What are you doing up there?" Her mother's voice broke through the attic stillness, sharp and accusatory. Leela's heart raced, her body tense. "I found something," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady as she clutched the journal tightly. "Something about Jake, about the lake." Her mother's face paled, and for a moment it was as if the air around them thickened with unsaid words. "You shouldn't be reading that," she said, her tone laced with panic. "It's not safe." "Not safe?" Leela echoed, incredulous. "What's not safe is keeping secrets. This isn't just about a drowning Anor. It's about what really happened to him." "Was there something more?" Her mother stepped back, tears pooling in her eyes. "You don't understand, Leela. You can't." "Then help me understand," Leela cried, her voice cracking. "I deserve to know the truth." "We both do." With a resigned sigh, her mother sank onto a weathered trunk, her composure crumbling. "Jake was special," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. "He was always drawn to that lake, and it scared me. I tried to protect you both from it. I thought if we ignored it, it would go away." "Protect us from what?" Leela pressed, her heart pounding. "What really happened that day?" Her mother's eyes shimmered with pain, and she finally met Leela's gaze, a torrent of emotion swirling between them. "There were rumors, rituals. They believed if they offered a sacrifice to the lake, it would spare others. Jake was drawn into it. I didn't know until it was too late." The weight of the revelation crashed down on Leela. The lake was more than just a tragic memory. It was a place of darkness that had claimed her brother. "So, you knew?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You let us play near a place like that. I thought I was protecting you. I thought he'd be safe." The anguish in her mother's voice cut deeper than any wound, and Leela felt a mix of anger and sorrow bubble to the surface. In that moment, Leela understood that their family had been shackled by fear and silence for far too long. With the truth laid bare between them, she felt a fierce determination ignite. She would confront the lake and uncover the sinister forces that had taken her brother. She couldn't change the past, but she could reclaim their narrative, one haunting secret at a time. Chapter 6: Confronting the Darkness. The moon hung low in the sky, a pale witness to Leela's trembling resolve as she stood at the water's edge once more. The lake stretched out before her, a vast black mirror reflecting the horrors she had unearthed. Her heart raced, a mixture of dread and determination thrumming through her veins. Tonight, she would confront the darkness that had haunted her family for far too long. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the night alive with the rustle of unseen creatures. Leela took a deep breath, the chill seeping into her bones as she stepped forward, the water creeping over her ankles. She hesitated, the memories of Jake flickering in her mind, a mix of laughter and despair. She could still hear his voice, soft and pleading, echoing through the stillness. "Leela, help me." "I'm here," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely carrying over the gentle lap of the waves. With each step deeper into the lake, the cold water enveloped her, pulling her down with an insistent tug. It felt as if the lake itself was alive, eager to embrace her in its depths. As the water reached her waist, an unseen force surged around her, and she gasped as it yanked her under, plunging her into the icy abyss. Panic seized her, and for a moment she flailed, desperately trying to find the surface. But the lake held her fast, a dark entity determined to reveal its secrets. Suddenly, she was submerged in a haunting vision. Shadows danced before her, swirling in a dark mist. Then, through the gloom, she saw him, Jake, his spirit glowing with an ethereal light, his expression filled with anguish. "Leela," he cried, his voice echoing through the depths, both familiar and foreign. "Why didn't you save me? I'm here. I've come to help," she shouted, but the water swallowed her words, leaving her to choke on despair. The visions shifted, and the scene morphed into chaos. Jake laughing with friends, the warmth of sunlight against their skin, a stark contrast to the cold that now surrounded her. But then it darkened. She saw the day he vanished, the group of kids by the lake. Laughter turned to shrieks as Jake was pulled beneath the surface. A figure loomed over him, cloaked in shadow, whispering words that twisted her stomach with dread. Ritualistic chants filled her ears, echoing with a dark rhythm that resonated deep in her soul. Leela's heart raced as the reality of what she was witnessing crashed over her like a wave. "No," she screamed, her voice barely a whisper against the rush of water. The entity that had taken her brother loomed larger, its presence suffocating, wrapping around her like a serpent. "Jake, fight it," she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks, mingling with the cold water. But as she struggled to hold on to hope, the darkness enveloped her further, threatening to drown her resolve. "You're mine," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of despair. "You can't save him, Leela. He belongs to me." In that moment, she felt her sanity slipping away, the line between reality and illusion blurring with each heartbeat. But a spark ignited within her, a fierce determination to confront the horror that had taken her brother. "I will not let you take him," she screamed, summoning every ounce of strength as she pushed against the darkness. In a final, desperate act, Leela reached for Jake, her brother, who had once been vibrant and full of life. "I'm here. I will save you." And with that, she fought against the tide, determined to pull him back from the abyss, determined to reclaim her brother from the grip of the lake's ancient evil. Chapter 7. The Choice. Leela's lungs burned as she fought against the suffocating darkness, her body twisting in an instinctual struggle for air. The entity loomed before her, a whirlpool of shadows that seeped into her very being, dragging her deeper into its cold embrace. Panic clawed at her throat, yet amid the terror, a flicker of clarity emerged. The water was both her prison and the wellspring of truth. To confront it meant facing the deepest corners of her heart, the pain, the guilt, the grief. As she sank further, the shadows coiled around her, whispering insidious lies. "You're too weak, Leela. You can't fight this. You can't save him." Their voices echoed, a chorus of her darkest thoughts. Each syllable felt like a dagger, piercing her resolve. Yet, at that moment, Leela understood. She had to confront her fears, not just for Jake, but for herself. She would not be a victim of the lake's ancient malevolence any longer. With a sudden surge of defiance, she gathered every ounce of strength she had left. The darkness pressed in, but she focused on Jake's face, the boy who had once laughed and dreamed beside her. "I won't let you take him," she shouted, her voice resonating in the depths of her mind, her words echoing like a battle cry. Leela's vision shifted again, the water swirling to reveal moments of her childhood, long-forgotten memories that rushed back like a tidal wave. She saw the day they built a fort in the living room, his laughter ringing through the house, a melody of innocence. But the laughter faded, replaced by the haunting reality of that fateful day. Guilt crashed over her, heavy as lead. "I should have saved you," she thought, anger surging at herself. "Why didn't I try harder?" The entity shifted, sensing her turmoil. "You're responsible for his death, Leela. You were supposed to protect him." It mocked her, a shadowy figure swirling in a tempest of regret. "No!" Leela screamed, clenching her fists. "I wasn't there, but I can't let you win. You don't own him." In a moment of revelation, she realized that the only way to break the cycle of fear and guilt was to embrace her memories, however painful. With every ounce of strength, she reached out, grasping the shadows that threatened to consume her. "Jake!" she cried, calling out to him with everything she had. "I won't abandon you." The shadows recoiled, the darkness flickering like a flame in the wind. It shrieked, a sound of pure rage, as Lila pushed against it, the force of her love and grief a weapon against the entity's power. She felt the water swirl around her, pulling her under, yet she fought back with a fury she didn't know she possessed. Leela had a choice: to succumb to despair or to rise above it. She focused on the love she felt for her brother, the bond that death could not sever. "You are not lost to me, Jake," she screamed, determination surging within her. With a final, defiant thrust, she broke through the surface of the water, gasping for breath as the shadows receded. The lake trembled, the dark entity howling in frustration as Leela emerged, lungs filling with air, heart pounding with newfound strength. She would not be broken by the past. In that moment of triumph, she realized she wasn't just fighting for Jake, she was fighting for herself. The lake could no longer hold her captive. The darkness might linger, but she would face it, no matter the cost. The truth would set her free. Chapter 8: Acceptance and Aftermath. Leela gasped as she broke the surface, lungs burning and heart racing. The night air was sharp and alive, contrasting the cold grip of the water that had held her prisoner. She lay on the shore, the damp sand cool against her skin, staring up at the moon that seemed to watch over her, a silent witness to her transformation. The shadows that had once threatened to consume her were now mere wisps, fading into the night as she finally exhaled the weight of fear and guilt that had bound her for so long. The lake stretched out before her, its surface now calm, reflecting the stars above like a serene mirror. No longer was it a place of terror. Instead, it became a bittersweet reminder of everything she had faced. The memories of Jake flooded back, not as haunting echoes, but as fragments of joy and laughter that filled her heart with warmth. The darkness had revealed the truth, but it had also forged a path to acceptance. Sitting up, Leela felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose. She understood now that she couldn't change what had happened, but she could honor Jake's memory by sharing his story. It was time to break the silence that had surrounded their family, to illuminate the shadows that had kept them from healing. She rose, water dripping from her body, determination igniting her every step as she made her way back to her car. Over the next few weeks, Leela shared her experiences with her family and friends, speaking openly about Jake and the dark history of the lake. With each word, she could feel the burdens of shame and secrecy dissolving, creating space for healing. The community began to gather, exchanging stories and sharing their own fears. Together, they organized a memorial for Jake, a celebration of his life, embracing the pain of loss while cherishing the joy he had brought to them all. On the day of the memorial, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the gathering of friends and family at the lakeside. As they shared laughter and tears, Lila felt a profound sense of connection, a tapestry of lives woven together in love and remembrance. In the midst of it all, she caught sight of a small ripple in the water, a subtle reminder of the lake's secrets, a whisper that echoed in her heart. That evening, as the last of the sunlight faded and stars began to dot the sky, Lila stood alone at the water's edge, a mix of gratitude and apprehension swirling within her. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered, the breeze carrying her words away like forgotten dreams. But just as she turned to leave, a ripple danced across the surface, catching her attention. She glanced back, her heart racing. The lake was still, yet the air felt charged, as if the water held its breath, waiting. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a final reminder that while she had found closure, the mysteries of the lake were far from buried. And as she walked away, Lila knew that she had not only accepted her past, but she had also opened a door to the unknown, a path that could lead her back to the lake, back to Jake, should the darkness ever call her name again.